Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's beat these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. Here we go. Touchdown!
You're listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right of the week, and we've got a Victory Monday to talk about as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 275. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with Greg Cosell about the Eagles and their Week 4 win over the San Francisco 49ers. It was an eventful game. There were plays made on both sides of the football, and we will talk all about that before transitioning to this weekend's matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Chalk Talk. Before we get to that, though, just a quick reminder, if you have not yet, please jump on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating and leave us a comment. If you leave a question, I promise you that we will answer it here on the show, because guess what? After tonight's episode, we are completely tapped out. You guys have done such a great job since the start of the season of flooding that Apple Podcast page with questions, with comments, with ratings. And I've been answering a couple of those questions every single episode since the start. Well, we are completely tapped out. So now's the time. If you go on, you leave that rating, you leave that comment. If you leave a question, I will answer it later in the week right here on this show, because I do those late week episodes with myself, with Ben Fennell, with a player. We're going to be talking all about this week's matchup against Pittsburgh in that episode. So if you want your question answered, just jump on Apple Podcasts right now, leave us a rating, leave us a comment with a question in the text, and we will make sure we will answer it here on the show, which, by the way, not only can you catch Ben Fennell and I weekly here on this channel, but you can also, if you're a fan of the NFL draft, or even if you're just starting to kind of get that itch looking ahead to who the top players are for next spring's draft, you can also catch Ben and I every week, twice a week, over on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, wherever podcasts can be found. All right, enough of all that. Let's dive now into our chat with Greg Cosell in Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, joining us once again here on Chalk Talk on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, our friend Greg Cosell. Greg, like I said earlier, Victory Monday for the Eagles. First time of the season. The Eagles come up with a win. They now sit in sole possession of first place of the NFC East. So this season is looking up, Greg. But let's look. Obviously, a big win, right? You saw big plays on both sides of the ball, a much-needed victory for this team, right? So, it's while there are still things to correct. Doug Peterson said that the atmosphere on the plane back home was electric. The guys have to be fired up. It's good to get into the win column after the adversity they faced over the last couple of weeks, and they continue to because of these injuries as they continue to mount up.
When you're not playing well, it's all baby steps. You talk to any coach in this league, Fran, and you know this, working for the Eagles and being in the building every day, that they'll all tell you how hard it is to win on Sundays, no matter who you're playing. So when you get a win, particularly when you've been struggling, that's the starting point. That's all you care about. It's baby steps. It's a cliche, but the truest cliche in football is it's just one day at a time. That's all you're looking to do. And now it's the next day of practice, then the next day, then the next day, and then you get to the next game on Sunday. And that's all you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's what, in talking with friends, just even over the last few weeks, and, they say, oh, well, look at the schedule coming up. How are the Eagles going to get through this? After seeing the start of the first couple games. And I say, look, you don't have to beat San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, right in a row. You just have to beat San Francisco next week. And then the week after that, you've got to beat Pittsburgh. And the week after that, then you beat Baltimore. So that's kind of where the Eagles are at right now. I said that somewhat in jest at the beginning, but they are in sole possession of first place in the NFC East. The rest of the East is not playing well. Handle your business. Take care of what you've got to take care of, and you go one game at a time. And all of the goals that you had at the beginning of the season are definitely still out in front of you. So that being said, let's get into what we saw from Sunday Night Football. And as always, we will start with the quarterback position, Carson Wentz. Certainly, I would say his best game of the season. I would say, while he had some misses in this game, he definitely looked the most normal that we've seen from him this year, if that makes sense. Outside, I guess, of like the first half of Washington, you had that, okay, like that's Carson Wentz kind of feel in this matchup.
Yeah, the way I'd answer that, and there's no question, and we discussed this last week, that he'd been fighting it, and we don't need to rehash what we said last week. I thought that this was his best game physically. I thought he threw the ball well in this game. Mentally, I still think he's working through some things, and that's okay, because as long as you're not making poor throws, which can lead to problems, I think you can keep working on the mental aspect. That's what coaching is. That's what you do during the week. But I thought as far as throwing the ball, we saw some Wentzian type things. We saw him make some throws on the move that we're used to seeing. Clearly the touchdown to Fulgham at the end of in the fourth quarter was a big time throw. It was probably his best throw of the season because it was a well covered play. Johnson was covered it pretty well on the vertical route. I actually thought that, is it pronounced Fulgham?
Fulgham, yeah. And he didn't give him a ton of room along the sideline.
No, because he got pushed to the sideline, but I thought he fought through it just enough so that he didn't get pushed out of bounds. He showed some strength on the route. But Carson threw that ball with confidence, because a throw like that tends to be a little bit of a spot throw. You're throwing it to a spot as opposed to waiting for the receiver. But he placed that ball beautifully. And, that's something we'd been used to seeing over the years, but had not seen much of through 3 games. And that was just a great throw.
And reporters did a good job of asking Carson after the game, so how often have you guys practiced that play with you and Travis? And he said, one time in practice, and it hit. So they're 2 for 2. Right. 2 for 2 right now on that play. There's a few things that we saw, I would say, schematically. Certainly, we talked last week about the tempo. They ran tempo a little bit in this match. San Francisco. We saw a lot of Carson Wentz moving under center, moving the pocket, right? So getting him outside the pocket.
That's what we saw a lot of.
A lot of that. And that not only helps Carson, but that helps an offensive line, which had their fourth different combination in as many weeks. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. But I thought that we saw some good things from Carson, on the move, not just as a passer, but as a runner. Once again, just seeing him being able to make some plays with his feet to move the chains in this game.
Yeah, no, we did for sure. And I think the movement part was obviously something that they clearly game planned, and they had some success with it. On the second possession, I liked the play of Ward for 20 yards. It came on a nice misdirection concept off toss action with the Wentz play action boot, with Ward running the crosser opposite the toss action. And they were able to really get the second level defenders for the 49ers to flow toward the toss action. And then, of course, Ward came with the crosser. So that was a very nice concept and a very well-executed play. So we saw a bit of that to get Wentz outside the pocket. And as you said, you made a great point. I think that helps the O-line, and it helps them get comfortable. So we did see some nice things. Obviously, they decided that the wham concept was something they would start with. They ran it, I believe, on the first play of the game and also on the second possession. So it was, we didn't see it a ton, but it was clearly something they felt from a game plan standpoint that they wanted to show early in the game.
So let me ask you this. One thing that we saw a lot of in this game as well, the Eagles called up Adrian Killins, the rookie from Central Florida, and we saw a ton of jet action with Adrian Killins. For our listeners, give us a little bit of an elevator speech on the impact of jet action and what is the goal for the offense on that kind of pre-snap motion.
Well, what you're trying to do with jet action, and motion has become a much bigger part of the NFL. A lot more teams use motion, and they do it for a number of reasons. One reason is it helps you define what the defense is doing. Because obviously, if someone is going to run across the field with the receiver, particularly that kind of motion, that is crisp motion. That's not just a little, a guy kind of jogging to a spot. That's crisp motion. So if someone's going to run across the field hard with that, it gives you a pretty good pre-snap indicator that you're facing man. Number 2, that kind of motion grabs the eyes of second-level defenders. Even if it's not man, it grabs their eyes. And very often, they take a step in the wrong direction. If you, let's say, go jet motion one way and then the play you're running goes the other way, that motion one way can grab the eyes of second-level defenders. They either hesitate or they take a step toward the motion. And Fran, in the NFL, one step in the wrong direction can mean an awful lot on a play. So basically, those are two reasons right there. I'm sure there are others, but those are two reasons why you do it. And motion itself has become such a major part of this league.
Yeah, and Doug Peterson said last week that they were going to need to get creative with the pieces at their disposal.
Yes.
And the 49ers, they put the clamps on Zach Ertz. After the first couple drives, Greg Ward was not too much of a factor. Miles Sanders, the Eagles ran that Texas route late in the game, and outside of that, and a couple of dump offs, like Miles Sanders was not much of a factor in the passing game. So, it was Richard Rodgers, it was Travis Fulgham, it was John Hightower, and they just kind of, basically figured out how to move the ball bit by bit down the field. And I think that all of these little things that they were able to work in, the jet action, the moving the pocket, Carson using his legs. We saw a couple of zone reads, certainly the use of Jalen Hurts in different spots. Those all are just different ways. You just kind of, for lack of a better term, you're trying to nickel and dime your way down the field. Trying to just figure out, how do we move the sticks on this one? All right, now we got a new set of downs. How do we move the sticks here?
You're trying to manufacture offense.
Exactly.
And one thing I'd still like to see, and again, just because I see every team in the league, I'd like to see less individual isolation routes and more route combinations. Because there's so many just individual routes, whether it's versus man or zone. And I think, ultimately, look, if you're playing zone, you want to try to create space. You want to try to get people into the voids in zones. Or the other part of playing against zone is you want to try to put a particular defender in conflict with the route combination, where there's a gray area for the defender. For that particular defender, you kind of distort his responsibilities. Against man, I would love to see just what they did on the 2-point conversion. I'd love to see more of those kinds of things, whether it's stacks, bunch, natural rub elements, things of that nature to help receivers, because you don't have the kinds of receivers right now that are simply going to line up and consistently win isolation routes.
And I think on that front, I thought it was a good sign. I think we saw a little bit more of that in this game. You mentioned the 2-point conversion play to Zach Ertz. They ran the 4th and 4 conversion to John Hightower late in the game, was off a similar kind of play where he ran a rub underneath Travis Fulgham. So you started to see some of those kinds of things come back into the offense a little bit, and that was certainly a good thing to see for sure. There were a couple of other plays that pop into my mind where even it was. I'm trying to remember the exact scenario, and I think you have your notes in front of you. You might be able to remember. It was like a 3rd down play late in the game where Miles Sanders, they tried to release him on a little bit of a wheel route, and it looked like Zach Ertz was trying to basically create a little bit of a rub for him, and the timing was a little bit off.
I know the play. I know the play you're speaking about. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So again, it's baby steps, but I think that's something you're working toward, because ultimately, look, I don't think we're saying anything out of school here to say that it's obviously the receiving core is a little banged up, and you're trying to manufacture offense, and there's many ways to manufacture it, but you try to do it schematically as well.
Yeah, and when you look at the run game, once again, you saw a wide variety of different schemes. We saw, you mentioned the wham concept. We saw a couple trap runs. We saw the tackle traps. We saw a couple different draws, a couple different RPOs with different blocking schemes up front. We saw split zone stretch. I mean, they snuck in a couple different run schemes, a few different run schemes into this matchup, and that's something I think they're going to have to continue to do as well. Were
you surprised that 11 personnel was the predominant personnel package?
No, I think with the loss of Goddard, I think that kind of, levels the playing field, I guess, a little bit in terms of the importance of 12 versus 11, I guess, on this depth chart at this point, right?
Yeah, because they were over 50% 11 personnel in this game.
When was the last time they did that? I mean,
that would be a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that certainly to think about. I think the loss of Goddard, and we talked about that last week. It's big for this offense, because of what he can do, not just as a pass catcher, vertically down the field, really at all 3 levels, but in the run game as well. Let's talk about the offensive line, Greg, because one of the big storylines, I know one of the things I got lots of questions about this morning and even overnight was Jordan Mailata, his first start ever playing football. Played 20 snaps live in regular season action before Sunday night. Ended up playing 62 snaps, all 62 snaps on offense. What'd you see from Jordan Mailata in his debut?
I would say it's solid. I thought there were, a number of snaps he'd probably like to have back. But overall, I thought it was a solid performance. I wasn't surprised at all that I think it was the first series that they stunted to that side, because Herbig was the left guard as well. So you're dealing with two inexperienced players. So I thought Mulatto was really, really good in the pass game when he could short set.
Right.
I thought he struggled a bit on the deeper sets, and I'll get to talk to my buddy Trey Thomas about this. I thought there were times he struggled might be too strong a word, but just things he needs to work through from a technique standpoint. Because when you have a great athlete, and there's no question he's a great athlete for a man that big, but when you see that a great athlete not look like a great athlete, that's a technique thing. And the guy played 20 snaps before the game, so you got to give him a little bit of a mulligan. But overall, it was a solid performance, and he did not hurt the Eagles' offense.
No, that's what was the thing that stood out to me, because I was really anxious to watch it this morning and really excited to watch it. Anxious is probably the wrong word there, because to me he never looked outmatched. It never looks too big for him.
He didn't look out of place.
No, physically and mentally. I thought that, there were certain times where, he let a defender into his chest. He got a little bit crossed up. He had a couple of times where defenders maybe stepped on his foot and he kind of lost his balance. Him and Nate Herbig weren't always on the same level, so they had trouble passing things off at times. You mentioned they ran stunts to their side a couple of times. I actually thought that Mailata even handled things a little bit better than Herbig did on a couple of those. And to me, there were some really good things I thought we saw from Mailata. Just it's a good starting point, right? Like he did not look like, oh man, like put this guy in the Pro Bowl right now. I don't want fans and listeners to come away with that notion, but I thought we saw a lot of really intriguing things for a guy that has still. I mean, the guy did not play football 4 years ago.
Look, it's the goal of coaches to make sure he plays at the highest level he can, and it's the NFL, so no one accepts. Theoretically, you shouldn't accept failure on any play, but then you use it as a coaching point. There were a couple of snaps where I thought on some of the deeper sets where he stopped his feet a couple times, and that's a technique thing, because the guy's got really light feet and is a great athlete. So that's just all technique. That now you have 62 snaps in which to work on, as opposed to just 20 and not playing in the true cauldron of fire in a game like that. So, no, I think overall it was a very solid performance.
Yeah, it's going to give us really something to watch over the next couple of weeks, is just how he does there on the left side. It was a really, really intriguing debut. And as I mentioned earlier, that was good scheming by the Eagles coaches as well, where you saw them move the pocket. We saw more RPOs in this game, and those certainly helped the offensive line as well, because you're not asking them to drop back and pass set. Those guys are firing off the ball more often than not in the run game on those RPOs. So, again, you're relying on this guy. Just, hey, do your job. You don't have to hold up on an island for 4 or 5 seconds. We're just asking you to really just kind of hold tight for a couple of seconds here, just kind of get in the way of this guy and do your job. And there were a few times where he was left one-on-one in pass protection. You had to do it at some point. But in those instances, I thought he more than held his own, which was certainly.
And don't forget, he's not the only one. Herbig's not a guy. He's not a veteran who's played a ton of snaps, nor has Matt Pryor.
No.
So, I mean, you're playing. Look, you can't play scared, but on the other hand, you can't play stupid. And I thought they did a nice job. They can only win this game a certain way. And this will be true probably this week, and we'll get to it against the Steelers as well. They're not going to win these games 41-38. Right. That's not going to happen. So you have to play a certain way, and you have to be realistic about your personnel and how you can maximize what they do and minimize what they can't do. And that's coaching.
Yep, no, it's a really good point. Let's take it over to the other side, Greg. Let's talk about the Eagles defense in a game where they really did some really good things. Once again, I mean, the defensive line I thought really showed up in this game, not just as pass rushers, but the effort and pursuit and the screen game I thought was really, really good. They did a really nice job against the run as well. We talked about the San Francisco offense and how tough they can be to defend. They had all their horses, at least in terms of Kittle returning. You saw Deebo Samuel make his debut. So. The arrow certainly pointing up on that team moving forward. But I thought the defense really did a nice job overall in this game, despite being down a couple of key players as well.
Yeah, and clearly they got lucky on that second play when Mullins just overthrew Juszczyk. That would have been a very big play. And who knows what a play like that does in a game. But I tell you, what stood out really early to me, and it was very surprising, is there were probably 3 or 4 snaps in the first quarter where Derek Barnett just dominated Trent Williams.
Which we hadn't seen all season. Trent Williams has been outstanding. Yeah.
No, it jumped off the film. I wasn't studying Derek Barnett and saying, let me just watch him.
Right.
But it just jumped off the film.
I agree.
And which was kind of surprising because Trent Williams is a really, really good player. And in some ways, for me, that kind of set the tempo. I thought they mixed and matched personnel. Obviously, they lost some people. They got really good snaps in the second half from Alex Singleton, a player, if I'm being totally honest, I had never heard of. Maybe you knew a little about him. I did not. But I thought look, the interception was just a terrible play by Mullins, and he threw it right to Singleton. But I thought he had some really good snaps in the run game. I mean, he showed up on film.
You need to spend more time studying CFL tape, Greg.
That's okay. I that does not fit into my schedule.
Well, yeah, I certainly agree, though. They got some good snaps from Singleton in the second half after the TJ Edwards injury. They had to move Jalen Mills out to the cornerback spot. So he went and played right corner. We saw more snaps from Kayvon Wallace and from Marcus Epps at the safety spot. It seemed like they had a nice rotation going there, guys playing in certain packages.
Yeah, they had a lot of packages. I mean, obviously Wallace played in the base, and then they did some things, when they got to in their nickel and then in their dime. I mean, it was all different kinds of things that they did, which you have to do. I mean, you're trying to mix and match and get the most out of your personnel.
It seemed like they played a little bit more quarters in this game, Greg. I didn't chart it, but it seemed like that they were playing a little bit more cover 4, which is ironic because we talked about this with San Francisco a week ago. But I thought that was interesting. And again, it's tough because you don't know how much of this was because late in the week Trevor Williams got hurt,
right,
and then he goes on injured reserve, so they had to make that late switch to Jalen Mills to move into corner, and they had to kind of shuffle things around. But I thought that was interesting. We saw a little bit more cover 4 from this group, certainly than we had seen early in the season, the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, I didn't chart it either, but I don't think they played as much cover 1 as they've been playing.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I mean, look at the 49ers' final 2 possessions where they basically rushed 4 on every snap. They did not blitz. They played cover 4, cover 3, cover 2. They played some cover 1 where they had Epps matched on Kittle. They played one robber where they had LeBlanc matched on Kittle. So they did a number of different things, but I don't think overall they played as much cover 1 because they've been playing a ton of cover 1.
They have. Let me ask you one question. I want to see if we're on the same page here. There was one player that consistently stood out in this game for the Eagles defense that, you mentioned Derek Barnett and how he just kind of jumped off the film. There was one other player that did the same thing for me. Is there a guy that if you had to say outside of Barnett that did that for you? I'm wondering if we saw the same thing.
That player for me would be Rodney McLeod.
Without question. Rodney McLeod was really, really good in this game.
I thought he was super active playing downhill in the run game, and he brought it. I mean, because he's normally the post safety.
Yep.
He does not play in the box very much now in this particular defense, the way it's set up. But I thought he played downhill with force, with aggression. He squared up. He hit people. He showed up on tape.
It wasn't just I think, fans say,
the interception got thrown to him because Avery did a great job with the pressure. Riley did a great job reading the boot action by Mo.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, I mean, that was, theoretically, you and I could have made the pick. That was not McLeod gets credit in the box score. That was not his play per se. But putting that aside, I thought he played really good football.
Yeah, it was. I was really, really impressed with Rodney McLeod in this matchup.
I guess we're on the same. I guess we watched the same tape, Fran.
Yeah, the tape. The eye in the sky doesn't lie, Greg.
No.
The tape shows us what the tape shows us.
Exactly.
And from a defensive line standpoint, you mentioned Jannard Avery there. Avery very active in this game. Had a handful of pressures. We saw him go speed to power late in the game. What did you see from Avery in terms of his usage and how he was able to be effective?
He was effective. And by the way, a number of snaps again of 5 D linemen, more so than the week before. I didn't chart the number, but my guess is it was 5 or 6. So, no, that's something that clearly is part of the Jim Schwartz playbook right now, depending on situation, personnel, however he decides to do it. But no, Avery was an active player. And, I go back to that first year in Cleveland. He was a really good edge pass rusher. And I think if you can get him back to doing that, he adds an awful lot to this team.
He's got some juice. I mean, there were a couple of those plays where he just laid a lick on the quarterback, and he was able to get home for a couple sacks there as well. We've talked about Derek Barnett. Malik Jackson, I thought, was really active once again. I'm trying to just kind of roll through the Rolodex here and think of any other players. Darius Slay continues to show up. He had the pass break up on the Hail Mary, which he perfectly timed that jump. Thankfully, it was a great play in the end zone. But defensively, overall, really strong team effort. To me, the big thing, and everyone was talking about the turnovers. Oh, they haven't created any turnovers yet on defense. When are they going to come? Where's the big plays at? Where are the big plays? And that's always, and I agree with you. I know I've heard you say this before. That's such a tough question to answer because there's only so much you can do in terms of like coaching and scheme to get turnovers. But if you consistently play with that temperament that I thought they showed throughout much of this game, you're always around the football. Good things happen at some point, and those turnovers just happen in bunches.
Yeah, I mean, look, they had the LeBlanc sack forced fumble on 3rd and 10 in the fourth quarter. It was their second Mike Star blitz of the game. What that means is the Mike linebacker and the Star is the slot corner. Gary and LeBlanc were the blitzers. Barnett dropped into coverage. And LeBlanc's speed. This is what happens now in today's NFL because there's so many secondary blitzes, is you're just faster than offensive linemen. And the right guard Brunskill, he kind of recognized it. It beat late, but there's just too much speed by secondary guys. And LeBlanc got to the edge of Brunskill and was able to sack. That was Mullins, I believe.
That was Mullins. Yep.
Yeah, and Jackson recovered the fumble. So I mean, there was a turnover. The McLeod interception we talked about was caused by both Avery and Riley. Look, so you can't go into a game and, in my opinion, I know coaches coach trying to get turnovers. We know that, but I don't think you can predict turnovers necessarily in a given game.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do at that point. And like, who can predict that Nick Mullins is going to put the ball right on the face mask of Alex Singleton in the flat on a two-man route?
Yeah, I mean,
you can't coach that, right?
It takes nothing away from Singleton, obviously.
He makes the play that's given to him. Yeah.
But I mean, Mullins just dropped back, looked down the middle and figured, I forget who the receiver was, but he just figured he had the out route on the sideline and he just threw it. And he had no idea Singleton was there.
Well, let's put a ribbon on this one, Greg, and let's move forward now to the Eagles' Week 5 matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that's coming off an unexpected bye week. After their game against Tennessee got postponed and moved to Week 7, I believe, or Week 8. But let's talk about this Pittsburgh Steelers team and what they're going to bring to this matchup. I guess we could start with the Steelers' offense. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger now healthy, healthier than last year for sure. So he is in at quarterback. They've got a bunch of young receivers here, Greg. A bunch of guys that they like to be able to rotate in and use. Deontay Johnson has been their highest rated or their highest targeted receiver in terms of his usage. Crafty route runner. Interested to kind of get your take on the young guy. I mean, he's only, I believe, in his second year, Deontay Johnson, out of Toledo, a third-round pick a year ago. What are your thoughts on Deontay Johnson and what he's shown so far as really, the most targeted pass catcher in that offense?
Well, given being home all summer, I did a deep dive on a lot of players, probably about 20 quarterbacks, probably about 20 receivers. He was one of them. And I thought he was a fun watch. You can line him up in the slot. You can line him up outside. He's an explosive athlete. He can run short routes and run after catch. He can run vertical routes. He is their most explosive wide receiver. I mean, Chase Claypool can run fast in a straight line, and he did catch that long touchdown, but he doesn't play that many snaps and is not targeted a lot. But Johnson is a really explosive athlete. And
how does he compare, Greg, to Terry, a guy that was drafted in a similar range, Terry McLaurin? Are they? I guess they're similar kind of players, right?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, McLaurin is predominantly the X for the Redskins, whereas Johnson is not a one-position player for the Steelers because they have so many. Look, you can line up Juju Smith-Schuster inside or outside. James Washington, to me, is predominantly an outside guy. But yeah, I think that Johnson may even be a little shiftier than McLaurin.
Yeah,
that may be my point. McLaurin is obviously extremely fast vertically, maybe a touch more than Johnson, but I think Johnson has a little more shiftiness and elusiveness run after catch.
Yeah, you have Johnson. You mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster, a guy that's going to be is very highly debated. I feel, in terms of, is he better off just being a slot receiver? Can he play on the outside? Is he a quote unquote number one receiver after the departure of Antonio Brown? I mean, those are the things that people talk about. What are your thoughts on Juju Smith-Schuster?
It doesn't matter for the Steelers because they have so many.
Yep, that's
and they've got two really good receiving tight ends.
Right.
So it almost in Eric Ebron and Vance McDonald. So it doesn't really matter for the Steelers. They can line people up in different spots. I don't think you have to say, for our purposes anyway, obviously the way they coach it, we don't know. But for our purposes, Fran, for this discussion, they don't necessarily we don't have to say, oh, Deontay Johnson is an X, or he's this, or he's that. He's going to line up in multiple spots.
Yep. It's how the Eagles decide to deploy their defensive backs in this game will be interesting, considering the multiplicity of those receivers and how they're displaced throughout the course of the formation. Let's get to Ben Roethlisberger. What have you seen from Big Ben so far this year, coming off the surgery from a year ago?
I got to tell you, I think he's throwing the ball really well. I mean, I noticed that week 1 against the Giants, and I think he's throwing the ball well. I don't think there's a problem. It's funny. He's a big man, and people might have a certain sense of him. I never thought Ben was a power thrower, in the sense of like the arm, like the Matthew Staffords of the world. I think he can muscle it up and drive it when needed. But I think at his core, he's much more of a finesse thrower who can power it at times, but that he's not just a drive it powered thrower. And he's obviously very experienced. He knows what kinds of throws to make. He can still stand in the pocket late in the down and deliver the football. He's probably a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I think he's played very well through their first 3 games.
Let's take us through the run game. The guys sharing the backfield there with Big Ben. You've got James Conner, who essentially he's their lead back. Whenever he's healthy, a big-bodied kid, former third-round pick. Great story for listeners that don't know about James Conner and what he battled throughout his college career for the Pitt Panthers. But I believe he had Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and was able to survive. I mean, just a great story of adversity and a great kid. I got a chance to meet him a couple years ago. So easy player to root for, has not been able to stay healthy throughout the course of his career.
No, and I really like him as a runner. I mean, I don't know, look, the last 2 weeks he's gained over the last 2 weeks they played. He's gained over 100 yards. He had a big run in the fourth quarter, I think week 2, and then he had a big run in the fourth quarter, week 3. But hey, that's part of the game. Those runs count. But you're right. When he's healthy, he is the number 1 back. Benny Snell is essentially in their system the same back, and he obviously had the great game week 1. The guy I'm fascinated by, and I really enjoyed his tape coming out of Maryland, was Anthony Mcfarland. He is now sort of their change-up back, and you can run him on base runs, but he also has a lot of juice to get outside and be a receiver. So I don't know what your thoughts were when you watched him, but I think he's a really intriguing kind of satellite player in the context of their offense.
Yeah, he definitely was that kind of jitterbug player for Maryland over the last couple of years. He's definitely the most dynamic of their running backs. Certainly needs some work in pass protection. A lot of young backs do.
Right.
But made that debut last week, 10 snaps. I do feel like he can be that change of pace running back for them. Talk about Jalen Samuels, because he's a guy that can be used. It's interesting because, we just got done talking about a guy like Kyle Juszczyk a week ago for the San Francisco 49ers. I feel like Samuels could be that kind of player, obviously just not used that way by the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And I'm not sure where he fits now. Again,
right. Yep.
We're not there, so I don't know how they coach this stuff and what their plans are. But I think with a healthy Conner, and if McFarland keeps showing what they probably feel he can show, I'm not sure what Samuels is in the context of their offense, because they've got 2 really good tight ends. They've got at least 4 quality wideouts potentially. So I'm not sure where Samuels fits in the normal context of their offense, unless they just have a particular package of 3 or 4 plays that they want to put him out there. I guess what I'm saying is I don't see him as a guy who's going to play 15 or 20 snaps, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's, I guess the big thing, looking big picture at this offense in terms of this matchup, how the Eagles deploy their defensive backs. Is Darius Slay going to play sides? Is he going to match up? Is he going to match up in certain spots? That'll be an interesting storyline to follow. And then, run game, as you mentioned, it's a different style of run game than what the Eagles have seen for most of the season so far. Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, even in Cincinnati with Zach Taylor. I mean, they're trying to go lateral, get you, and then really cut up inside and stick a foot in the ground and gash you. I feel like with Pittsburgh, it's much more downhill, gap schemes, power, counter, ISO lead, all those kinds of things. You'll see a little bit of that in San Fran, but philosophically, they want to get you going side to side. So a little bit of a change of pace in terms of the run game there. Real quickly, just want to ask you, the offensive line, the only injuries on this team, you look around the NFL, all these teams are so banged up. Not just the Eagles, obviously the 49ers, but so many teams. The injured list is just full of guys. The only injuries on this team, they've got two guys really on injured reserve, and it's two offensive linemen, the two guys that were opening day starters on the right side. They lost them in consecutive plays in week one. Zach Banner at right tackle, former Eagle Stefan Wisniewski at right guard. David DeCastro is now back, and he's going to be the starter regardless. I think when you look at this offensive line, I'm interested to get kind of your thoughts on that group as a whole.
I think it's solid. Because Pouncey's still at center.
Pouncey's still at center. You have the former Eagle Alejandro Villanueva at left tackle. You have Chukwuma Okorafor was a recent draft pick.
Yeah, and he's playing right tackle now.
Yep.
And DeCastro is a really good right guard. So I think it's a solid group. I mean, look, I think in every game the Eagles play, you're going to talk about their D-line having to be a somewhat dominant force. If the Eagles' D-line gets handled in any given game, they're going to have a tough time. I mean, that's just the reality of life. That's because they've got a lot of good players on their D-line. So if that D-line as a whole happens to have a really bad week, it's going to be a tough deal. But I think the Steelers have a solid O-line. I think that, Roethlisberger as a veteran now helps that O-line, whereas maybe sometimes in his younger days, he didn't as much as he does now. But I still think that you have to find a way to pressure Roethlisberger. And we'll see. I mean, obviously, Jim Schwartz this year has been much more of a selective blitzer. We haven't seen the zero pressures that sometimes we're used to seeing.
Right.
But we'll see. But, it's a good O-line group in my view.
Let's go to the defensive side. Now, I'll go dealer's choice here. Would you rather talk about their pressure or would you rather talk about their coverage to start off? What in your mind is the bigger
Well, let's talk. We can
topic?
talk about it together because this is what I do all the time watching tape. You take good defenses. Like, let's look at the Patriots defense for a minute. The Bill Belichick philosophy tends to be multiple front looks, but a lot of coverage continuity. In other words, they play a lot of man coverage. The Steelers, to me, are somewhat the opposite. They led the NFL in sacks last year. I don't know the number, but I bet the high percentage of those sacks came from their front four. Tuitt last year, I think, missed a good part of the season. He back.
Did, yes.
But I mean, you have Dupre on one side, T.J. Watt, who is really a good passer. I mean,
he's turned into a much better player than I thought he would, Greg.
Yeah. The more tape I watch of him, the more I really like him. Obviously, they have Hayward. Now they have Tuitt. So that front four, whether they're in sub-nickel or sub-dime, and they play both, on third down they will be in dime with Cameron Sutton, the former Tennessee Vol, is their dime corner. But it's normally those four that supply the pressure. They'll blitz on occasion. They're not a non-blitz team, but the front four is where they get the majority of it. So there's a lot of stability in their front four. Coverage-wise is where there's a ton of multiplicity. I mean, there's a lot of disguise. There's a lot of late movement. There's a lot of guys being asked to do different things. I've seen snaps where Sutton lines up like he's the slot corner and then flies to the deep middle as the post safety. I'm sure you've seen the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
They do so many things on the back end. Clearly, they have smart players. Minkah Fitzpatrick is as savvy as any DB in the league. He can do multiple things. He's got safety skills and corner skills. So they do a lot on the back end to, ideally in their mind, confuse quarterbacks and receivers, because receivers have to make adjustments on the fly as well.
So let's talk about it from a personnel standpoint. You mentioned Minkah Fitzpatrick, the Steelers trading a first-round pick last fall. got immediate dividends. He turned into a huge playmaker for that unit a
Yes.
year ago, and now you just kind of see the impact he's had on the rest of that defense. What are your thoughts on Minka and just how he kind of stacks up against the rest of the safeties in the NFL? I mean, I got to think he's one of the bigger playmakers on the back end in today's game.
He is, and he can be used multiple ways. I mean, clearly he's probably the player who plays most at post safety and most as a back end player. But depending on what they call in a given game, he can also play robber. He can also be in the box. He can do multiple things. He's just a really, really smart player, and really, you probably wouldn't call him an explosive athlete, but he's a really good athlete.
And then you got the other safety who was kind of a surprise first-round pick back in 2018 in Terrell Edmonds. How was he used, and how do you kind of view him as being able to impact this matchup?
He's more of the box player, but every once in a while they'll match him up man to man. They'll even do that with wide receivers. Once in a while he'll struggle with that because that's not really his best attribute, but he's a big physical kid who can run. I mean, they have speed. That's the thing about this defense. I mean, we're talking about the back end now, but they've got Bush, the linebacker from Michigan. He can run. And a very underrated player in their defense is Vince Williams, who is, to me, a really important piece of their base and their sub-nickel. Does not play in sub-dime, but in sub-nickel, you wouldn't think of him as a blitzer. He's a very good blitzer.
He's a really good blitzer. I was just going to say he's a huge part of their pressure scheme.
Yeah, in sub-nickel, because he doesn't play in dime.
Right, sure.
Right.
No, you mentioned the speed that they've got on the field, and Devin Bush, who was their first-round pick a year ago in 2019. His versatility, they'll put him up on the line of scrimmage. They'll use him as a blitzer as well. But, I mean, this guy's an instinctive, violent, explosive player in the middle of the field. Has really lived up to that first-round billing, it seems.
And, they play a lot out of sub. I mean, look, will they play out of base? Sure. But Mike Hilton, who's their slot corner, has played 70% of their defensive snaps. A lot of times the Steelers will play sub-nickel to the opposing offense base personnel because they're very comfortable playing sub-nickel. And, Hilton he's a really good blitzer too. And and he's a pretty good cover guy. So this is a difficult defense to play against because they're very good, as you know, Fran, at all three levels. And in any given game, any level can be the dominant force.
Right.
But you better, we talk about Mailata. He's going to have to be. This is going to be an intriguing matchup for him. He'll be up against Dupree because Dupree and Watt normally don't switch sides.
I was just going to bring that up. Yep, exactly. So Dupree will come off the offensive left side. Watt will come off the offensive right.
And where's Lane Johnson? I guess we don't know what his situation is at this point.
Doug Peterson said that the injury is going to linger, and my guess, just kind of reading between the lines, is it's going to kind of be a pain tolerance thing. And knowing Lane, he's going to try and gut that out. So if he can go, he's going to try and go.
Right, and so you'll need him out there because T.J. Watt has become as savvy a pass rusher as there is in the league, just the way he can use his hands, the way he can play off contact, the way he can bend. I mean, he's become a pretty big-time pass rusher.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. He was a good player at Wisconsin. I did not think he was going to be this high level of a pass rusher. And you look at how he was able to win at Wisconsin. He's doing a lot of those same things. He's so good at being able to flash that inside hand, get you to throw your punch as an offensive lineman, and then he just turns the corner on you. One of the best. And he can also win with power as well, and he's effective on all their stunts. I mean, talk about what they do schematically, Greg. So much stunting. Really, when you look at how they use those guys up front, so much stunting, lots of different blitzes with guys coming from different levels that you mentioned, but very versatile in terms of the ways they can attack you up front.
This is a challenge for the Eagles, no question, because you're not going to face. I remember somebody asked me about, who do you see right now as the best defense in the league? And I didn't have to think twice. I said Steelers. I mean, wow. I think they're really good at all three levels.
Wow.
And because any one of those down four can win one-on-one too. You talk about scheme, and yes, they stun a lot, and yes, they will have specific pressure packages, but any one of their down four when they're in their sub front can win one-on-one.
Yeah, so you're talking Bud Dupree, T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, who a lot of people would say is one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL, and then Steph Tuitt, who is he is a massive human being who can win with power and win with quickness as well. The other thing that stands out, just looking at all three levels, you talked about the talent. There are no finesse players. They've got a mentality, they've got a profile. They are a tough, athletic, fast, explosive group. So,
and even their corners, Hayden's been in the league a long time, still a good player. Steven Nelson, smallish corner, but you talk about the physicality. He's a feisty, competitive kid. Now he'll get beat once in a while, but I mean, he is one of those feisty, competitive, hard-nosed guys that you love to have on your defense.
I believe, and I'm just checking this real quick, I believe he was in Kansas City when Doug Peterson was there, and he was there. He was drafted when Doug was there. He was drafted by Kansas City in 2015, just signed with Pittsburgh before the 2019 season. So
I remember watching him. He was Oregon State.
Oregon State, correct.
And I really like that kid. And, everybody immediately said slot corner because he's, 5'10"-ish? I mean, I don't know what his exact.
So, yes.
Yeah. But I always thought he could play on the outside. I mean, is he the ideal height? No. But who did he match up with in the Pac-12 where he had a great matchup at the time? It was a big-time wideout at the time coming out of the Pac-12. And he matched up exceptionally well. And I wish I could remember.
I'm looking at that season. So you had Jalen Strong, Arizona State, came out of the Pac-12.
Yes. He dominated Jalen Strong in that game to the point where they moved Strong into the slot.
And I feel if I remember right, you were a big fan of Jalen Strong, who was a Philly native.
Not.
You were not a big fan of Jalen Strong. I misremembered that. But now I'm looking back on my notes.
But that's
Steven
who it
Nelson
was.
As well.
Now that yes. But a lot of people were. I remember a lot of the draft gurus had Jalen Strong as their number one wideout that year.
That's right. Steven Nelson, just over 5'10", 197 pounds. I'm just reading through my notes, my bottom line on him. Scrappy corner with the quickness and technique to find a role in the defense as a potential starter down the road. He's not going to wow you, but he's got the job done at OSU. He's going to be tough to bet against.
What year was that?
He was 2015.
Okay, yeah, I'd have to. It would take too long for me to find that in my notes, but I liked him a lot. I thought it's funny. Some guys, when they come in the league, play exactly the way they did in college, and those guys are going to make it because nothing's changed. Other guys, they get in the league and they just don't look anything like they did in college.
Yeah,
and those guys are going to struggle.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier talking about Jordan Mailata. Usually if the guys that are great athletes don't play like they're great athletes, it's usually it's either a technique thing or a mental thing where they're trying to pick things up. No, it's a great point.
Well, and the funny thing with Jordan Mailata, and I know he played rugby, so he's played sports, but rugby's different than football, in many ways, obviously. But, I think one of the things you learn when you play football, and I play basketball and baseball, but it happens when you play competitive sports like that is, you get your butt kicked sometimes. And, when you get your butt kicked, it normally doesn't feel very good. And that's when you find out about guys, particularly offensive linemen, because we can talk about what a great athlete he is for 6'8", 346. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just got to win because you compete and you scrap. You're not going to look pretty all the time. And I can tell you one thing, he's not going to block Bud Dupree by looking pretty all the time. He's going to have to just block him by competing and fighting sometimes.
Yep.
And, when you get your butt kicked, that's when you find out how you want to compete and scrap.
It's what I just said about Steven Nelson. It wasn't always pretty at Oregon State, but he figured it out. He always found a way to get it done. And that's kind of, to me, I've seen a lot of parallels in just kind of how I view the positions between corner and offensive line, just because of what they're asked to do and body movements and things like that. And I think they're very similar in that way. And, you play corner, you play offensive lineman, you're going to get beat by guys because you're doing an unnatural movement, moving in reverse. We talk about this weekly on the Journey to the Draft podcast. But you're doing something that's a little bit unnatural against a guy who's got he's got the control coming off the ball, coming right at you, and a receiver or a defensive
He's
man.
doing is natural. What you're doing is unnatural.
Exactly. So, you got to figure it out. You got to figure out how to recover and a lot of different ways to do that. But you need that competitiveness and that fire and that fight to be able to do it. Well, Greg, this was fun, man. It's fun to talk about a win. Hopefully,
it's always fun to talk about a win, Fran.
That's exactly right. Hopefully we get to do it a week from now. We'll talk to you next week, Greg. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Fran.
Don't miss your chance to be in the stands at Lincoln Financial Field this season with an Eagles fan cutout. Put on your game day best and upload a photo of yourself so that you can still join us on game days while watching from the comfort and safety of your own home. Fan cutouts printed by Rico are only $100 with net proceeds benefiting Eagles Autism Foundation. Your purchase will also waive the registration fee for the 2021 Eagles Autism Challenge event. Order yours at PhiladelphiaEagles.com/cutouts.
Before we continue with this episode, it's really important that I talk to you about voting. In many states, this week is the deadline for registering to vote. Here in PA, that date isn't until October 19th, but in New Jersey, it's October 13th. That's just a week from right now. In Delaware, it's even less. That deadline is October 10th. That's later this week. That's only a few days away. You cannot register to vote at the polls on Election Day. It's different in every state when that deadline is. I need you to check and make sure that you can still register to vote. If you need help with registering, all you need to do is text EAGLES to 26797. Again, that's EAGLES to 26797. You can do it right from your cell phone right now, and you can get registered to vote just like that. Once you register, then you can figure out what's the best method for you to vote. Whether you vote by mail, you can start doing that now. You can go and vote early in person, which is happening right now all across the country, or you can vote in person on Election Day on November 3rd. But please, I've been saying this now on this show for a couple of weeks. 100 million eligible voters did not participate in the general election 4 years ago. Please, do what you can to help us lower that number. It's all of our civic duty to make sure that all of our voices are heard. Get out and vote on November 3rd. Great stuff from Greg, who you could follow on Twitter just like I do, at Greg Cosell. And while you're at it, I'm at EaglesXOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce at PhiladelphiaEagles.com. And you know, I greatly appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on all forms of social media. That's one way to support the show. But the other way is to go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating and leave us a comment. I wanted to give a shout out today to someone who did just that. That's Andrew101, who left us a 5-star review on our Stitcher page saying they love the show and especially our play breakdowns. Thanks so much for that rating and comment, Andrew. Special thanks to Greg Cosell and all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all of our podcast offerings here at Eagles Entertainment. All that being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I'm Fran Duffy. We'll talk to you later this week.